Greetings and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on a mission into a specialized yet incredibly fundamental field, speech audiometry. And this isn't just about measuring how quietly someone can hear a beep. This is the science of measuring how well people hear speech, the signal that, connects us to the world, governs communication, and really predicts quality of life. You provided us with a pretty dense stack of sources. I mean, it's basically a professional's deep reference guide, a medical textbook chapter on the absolute backbone of hearing assessment. Our job is to give you the ultimate shortcut. We're going to unpack every major term, every required procedure, and every clinical implication so you can walk away truly informed about this essential diagnostic discipline.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our focus today is translating these complex, really rigorous clinical procedures into clear, actionable concepts. We're not just defining terms here, we're explaining the foundational reasons why these standardized tests exist and what the clinical community sacrifices or gains by using one method over another. We'll cover the, surprisingly long history of speech assessment, the core thresholds like speech detection threshold and speech recognition threshold, the meticulous development of the specific word list used, and crucially, how we test hearing in the most challenging real-world conditions, background noise.
So our mission statement today is absolutely clear. We are diving deep. We're moving beyond just the basic definitions to the advanced diagnostic applications. We want to understand the psychometric functions, the statistical demands of test reliability, and that really revealing phenomenon of rollover. We need to ensure we understand not just what the tests are, but why they matter, why a specific score suggests a different type of pathology, and how it informs clinical outcomes and patient prognosis. So let's start at the beginning. Where did this all start? It feels incredibly modern, requiring precise calibration, specialized rooms, digital files. But the sources show auditory assessment using speech stimuli has a surprisingly long and highly relevant history.
It predates electricity, frankly. While the technology is new, the concept itself is old. Early attempts to study hearing sensitivity using speech stimuli date back nearly 2 centuries. We're talking the 1840s and 1860s. But we can go even further back. The sources highlight that in 1821, Ernst Heinrich Weber made a fundamental observation that really set the stage for all of this.
That's a key detail, 1821. What did Weber notice that became so foundational to this entire field?
He noted that simple speech components like vowels, consonants, or even groups of 3 voiceless consonants such as sh, t, and f could be used to classify hearing sensitivity.
That seems so simple now.
It seems rudimentary, but it was the initial realization that different speech sounds carry different acoustic energy and therefore reveal different aspects of hearing health. Vowels are high-energy, low-frequency sounds. Many consonants are low-energy, high-frequency. Using them systematically offers completely different diagnostic insights.
That immediately lays the groundwork for standardized quantification. But the big challenge in the 19th century must have been the source of the stimulus, the human voice itself, right?
Absolutely. The variability was just enormous. How loud do you speak? How far away do you stand? In 1886, Ferdinand K. von Hillebrand in Vienna took the critical next step towards standardization despite the lack of technology. He began measuring hearing using vowels and words spoken from a uniform distance.
I see. So if you control the distance between the speaker and the patient, you were attempting to control the intensity of the stimulus.
Precisely. Hillebrand was trying to impose objectivity on a very subjective process. But even a trained clinician speaking at a set distance is going to have variations in volume, pitch, rate of speech, and regional accent. The data, while it was standardized for the time, was highly vulnerable to tester variability.
And this leads us to the big technological leap that improved reliability. The sources mentioned the late 19th and early 20th century shift to recorded speech.
Yes, and this was massive. By the turn of the 20th century, the sources confirmed the use of recorded speech became absolutely essential for true standardization. This led to specific instruments, notably the Western Electric 4A, which incorporated a phonograph.
The phonograph audiometer. That must have been revolutionary for interclinic reliability.
It was. This shift from the live voice of the tester to a recorded, reproducible speech stimulus was a major, major improvement. It eliminated the variability caused by different speakers or even the same tester varying their volume and style over time.
So suddenly, a test administered in Vienna could theoretically be compared much more reliably to a test administered in New York.
That's it, exactly. This provided the foundation necessary for true cross-sectional scientific study in audiology. The push for reliability is really the hidden narrative of speech audiometry's history.
Okay, before we dive into the specific test protocols, we absolutely need a firm glossary. The sources throw out a dense alphabet soup of acronyms and terms. Let's start with the basic outcome measurement for suprathreshold testing, the speech recognition score, or SRS.
The speech recognition score, or SRS, sometimes called the speech identification score or even word recognition score, is the ultimate backbone measurement. It's defined as the percentage of speech stimuli, usually single monosyllabic words, correctly repeated or identified at a specified intensity level.
So it's a measure of understanding out of 100%. And you mentioned that it's often tied to a specific level, right?
Correct. SRS is often specifically used to refer to the percentage correct obtained at the patient's most comfortable loudness level, or MCL. That's the level where the patient reports the speech sounds clear but not too loud. Our sources also mention that SRS might be measured at a specific signal-to-noise ratio, or at the level corresponding to 50% correct identification, which connects the maximum score directly to functional ability.
That leads us to the critical distinction that underpins the initial stages of testing, the difference between merely hearing a sound and actively understanding a word.
This distinction is, well, it's paramount. It's the difference between perceiving a noise and processing linguistic information. The speech detection threshold, or SDT, sometimes you'll see it called the speech awareness threshold. SAT is the most basic measure. This is the minimum hearing level, measured in dBHL, where an individual perceives the presence of speech 50% of the time.
So they just know something was said, maybe a low rumble or a syllable, but they don't have to recognize the words themselves. It's a very low-level acoustic task.
Exactly, and this is clinically valuable for special populations. Infants, those with severe cognitive impairments, nonverbal patients, or those who can't reliably repeat words due to physical limitations, they only need to indicate that a sound occurred.
In contrast, the speech recognition threshold, or an SRT, requires a full cognitive step-up.
Yes. The SRT is defined as the minimum hearing level, where the individual can correctly recognize and repeat standardized speech stimuli 50% of the time. It requires understanding the word, not just detecting the sound pressure. This is the gold standard for establishing the functional threshold for communicative speech.
And this SRT isn't just a measurement on its own. It serves as a crucial verification tool for the primary pure tone tests, doesn't it?
It's a major clinical checkpoint, and the sources really stress its necessity. The SRT should generally be within 6 dB of the patient's pure tone average, or PTA, at 500, 1,000, and 2,000 hertz.
And those are the 3 frequencies most critical for conversational speech.
That's right.
So if that difference, the discrepancy between the pure tone average and the SRT is greater than 6 dB, what does that immediately tell the clinician?
If the difference is greater than 6 dB, it flags a really important question about the validity and integrity of the results. This could signal a few things. First, a functional or non-organic hearing loss, where the patient is exaggerating or fabricating their symptoms. Second, it could mean the patient misunderstood the task or that the tester made a calibration or procedural error.
So the SRT acts as an objective cross-check against the PTA.
Exactly. If someone has a terrible PTA but can easily repeat words at a quiet level, the PTA is suspect.
That correlation check is vital for ensuring the entire audiogram is reliable before moving to more complex procedures. Okay, let's quickly clarify the decibel levels dBHL and dBSPL because they're constantly referenced.
Sure. We operate primarily with 2 major scales that measure sound intensity. Decibel sound pressure level, or dBSPL, is the objective physical measure of sound intensity relative to a fixed reference point, 20 micropascals. It's what a microphone or a sound level meter measures. It's the raw physics of sound.
Okay, pure physics.
But humans don't perceive all frequencies equally. The ear is much more sensitive to mid-range frequencies than very low or very high ones. So we use decibel hearing level, or dBHL, which is the most common audiometric reference. dBHL relates the physical dBSPL to the average threshold of hearing for young normal listeners.
So 0 dBHL is a fixed physical point, but 0 dBHL is a normalized human perception point.
Exactly right. 0 dBHL is defined as the quietest sound a young, healthy ear can hear at a specific frequency. This normalization allows us to plot thresholds on an audiogram in a clinically meaningful way, where any deviation from 0 dBHL represents a loss of hearing relative to normal listener.
Got it. And that brings us to the third concept.
Yes, and tying these together is the third concept, sensation level, or SL. The source reminds us that sensation level is the intensity of a sound above an individual's own threshold. So, for example, if a patient's SRT is 20 dBHL and we present a word recognition test at 60 dBHL, we are testing them at 40 dB SL SRT.
That's a key refinement. Using sensation level ensures that when we test for word recognition, we are truly testing them at a consistent intensity above their individual starting point, regardless of how severe their loss is.
Precisely. It levels the playing field for testing.
So moving into the actual clinical execution, you mentioned the requirement for standardization.
We must underscore this. All speech audiometry measurements must meet the rigorous standards set by organizations like the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI.
We call these standards rigorous. What exactly do ANSI standards mandate that makes this process so reliable?
They're critical for reproducibility. ANSI mandates specific frequency response limits for all audiometric equipment, required measurement environments, how quiet the room must be, and detailed requirements for calibration checks.
Okay.
For instance, the exact output levels of the audiometer need verification annually, and biological checks must be performed daily. This ensures that the instrument itself is accurately producing the stimulus intensity claimed by the clinician. Without this rigor, results would be meaningless for comparison across clinics or time. And as we discussed historically, the presentation method has changed dramatically. Clinicians used to monitor their live voice via VU meters, but today recorded speech stimuli via CD or computer are now the professional standard.
Why this strict, unwavering move away from live voice?
Yeah.
A human could adapt to the patient.
While human adaptation might seem beneficial, it kills reliability. Recorded speech eliminates three major variables: speaker accent, the tendency for a speaker to subconsciously change volume or clarity across a testing session, and the inherent inconsistency in a voice's dynamic range. The sources emphasize that recorded speech provides superior intrasubject precision. If you want the patient's performance to be the only variable, you need a perfectly consistent stimulus.
Now let's dive into the core stimuli used for SRT, spondaic words. Okay, let's unpack this. What makes these words like hot dog or iceberg so effective for finding a pure speech threshold?
Spondees are specifically chosen because they possess a unique acoustic structure. They are two-syllable words with approximately equal stress on both syllables. Think of mousetrap or toothbrush. The acoustic energy is distributed across both syllables almost evenly.
And why is that even stress pattern so important for threshold determination?
Well, they exhibit what we call a steep articulation function. Because they have two strong syllables, they rise quickly in intensity, which makes them easier to identify than complex words or subtle single syllables. This rapid intensity growth allows the clinician to establish the minimum threshold more easily and accurately.
And they're also common words, right?
Crucially, yes. They are highly familiar for most native speakers. Standardized lists, such as the ASHA recommended lists, which include the 15 most homogeneous spondees like Inkwell and Firetruck, are mandatory for clinical practice to maintain that standardization.
So let's walk through the three key clinical steps of the SRT determination, starting with patient preparation.
Right. Step 1, instructions and response mode. The patient has to fully understand the task. For standard SRT, the patient is asked to repeat the word verbally. If the patient has articulation issues or a language barrier, alternative response modes like writing or pointing to a picture can be used.
So it's about getting an unambiguous response.
Absolutely. Then you move to step 2, familiarization. This step is non-negotiable and essential for validity. Each patient must be familiarized with the exact word list before the testing begins. The words are presented at a clearly audible superthreshold level.
Why is this so vital? If someone can hear, shouldn't they just recognize the word?
If the patient fails to recognize a word, we don't know if that failure is due to poor hearing or simply an unfamiliar vocabulary item. Familiarization ensures the threshold reflects the patient's hearing ability alone.
I see. So if a patient can't repeat a word during familiarization,
then that word must be removed from their list for that specific test session. Studies actually quantify this benefit. The SRT improves by about 5 dBHL when familiarization is used, showing how much noise unfamiliarity can add to the threshold determination.
okay, the patient is ready. Step 3 is the core process of determination, using the modified Huson-Westlake method. Tell us about the systematic hunt for that 50% threshold.
It's an ascending-descending bracketing procedure. The initial step is to find an approximate starting point. You present one spondaic word at a clearly audible level, often 40 dBHL. If it's correct, you drop the level in 10 dB steps until an incorrect response occurs, which confirms you are near the threshold.
Okay, so you've found the ballpark.
Right. Then, we refine the threshold using smaller steps. The sources outline two main variations of the Huson-Westlake procedure, and they really illustrate the clinical trade-off between accuracy and speed.
Let's start with the one that is theoretically more accurate.
That would be the 2 dB step size. This is very similar to pure tone threshold testing. You present two spondaic words at the starting level. Drop the level by 2 dB until the first incorrect response, and then you reverse the step. This is highly precise, but can be very time-consuming, particularly if the patient fatigues easily.
So if the 2 dB step is more accurate, why do clinicians rely so often on the faster 5 dB step size?
Oh.
What accuracy are we sacrificing for that speed?
And that's the core tension in any clinical setting. The 5 dB step size is faster because it moves in larger increments and uses groups of words. The method involves presenting 5 spondaic words at the starting level. You drop the level 5 dB for every group of 5 correct responses, and conversely, increase the level by 5 dB for every 1 incorrect response.
I see. So prioritizes efficiency.
It prioritizes finding the 50% correct level efficiently, often accepting a slightly broader margin of error in exchange for speed and reduced patient fatigue.
So we've pinpointed the threshold level. Now we have to address what might be the most confusing point in the sources, the final calculation of the SRT based on the Spearman-Carber equation. How do we make that final precise number understandable?
This is a moment where the clinical simplification can confuse listeners who want to know the arithmetic logic. The calculation method is trying to estimate the level at which the patient would correctly recognize exactly 50% of the words. The simplified arithmetic approach used clinically starts with a specific reference level, a level where 50% of the words should have been correct. The calculation then makes a correction based on the total number of words the patient got correct across the entire process.
Let's use the sources example, but really explain the logic of the correction.
Okay. So if a clinician starts at a high level and presents a total of 50 words across the descending steps, and the patient correctly repeated 32 words in total, the calculation shown is starting level, let's say 40 dB HL minus the correction factor, which yields 32 dB HL.
Fine.
The correction factor is designed to move the initial starting point down to the 50% recognition mark. If the patient got 32 correct, that means they got 16 words above the expected 50%. Since 50 words were presented, 25 is 50%. If we assume a linear decrease in recognition as volume decreases, those extra correct words indicate the true 50% threshold is lower. In this streamline method, the factor of 8 used in the sources example, 40 minus 8 equals 32 dBHL, is a simplified representation of the adjustment needed to reach that 50% probability point.
So the clinician doesn't need to track every single response meticulously during the test.
No, they just apply this final arithmetic correction to the total number of correct words to estimate the 50% point efficiently.
That makes the process much clearer. The calculation is an arithmetic shorthand for where the 50% accuracy point lies, assuming an underlying linear recognition function near the threshold.
Exactly. And that final SRT score, which must align within 6 dBs of the PTA, then serves as the verified foundation for all the subsequent testing.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Yes. Once we have the threshold, the SRT, we move to superthreshold testing. We analyze the patient's performance as intensity increases. This reveals how the auditory system is processing sound above the detection level. And to visualize this, we use the psychometric function.
The psychometric function, that's the graph plotting the percent correct recognition on the y-axis versus the presentation level on the x-axis.
Yes. Figure 5.1 in the sources shows the classic ideal S-shaped curve for recognition. As the sound intensity increases, performance moves rapidly from 0% correct up to a plateau. This S-shape reflects that once the threshold is crossed, understanding increases very quickly until the system hits its maximum capacity.
And what are the two key metrics we pull from this S-curve?
First, we look for the PB max, or performance balance maximum. This is the absolute maximum percentage of words the patient can correctly recognize, regardless of how loud we make the stimulus. For a normal listener, this should be 100%.
Okay, PV max.
Ha.
And the
Second, we examine the slope. The slope tells us how quickly recognition improves with increasing intensity. A steep slope indicates normal function. A shallow slope suggests distortion or inefficient processing.
Figure 5.2 really brings this function to life by showing 4 distinct curves corresponding to 4 types of hearing pathology. This is where we stop just measuring how much someone can't hear and start diagnosing why.
This figure is arguably the single most important diagnostic tool in speech audiometry.
Let's look at the 4 curves, starting with the 2 predictable ones.
The normal curve, which is curve #1, is our baseline. Steep slope, rapid rise, and it reaches a PB max of 100% very quickly, often by 30 or 40 dB SL-Re-SRT.
Makes sense?
Then we have conductive loss, that's curve #2. This is caused by sound attenuation, a problem in the outer or middle ear, like fluid or damage to the little bones. The patient has a steep slope and still achieves 100% PB max, but the curve is shifted significantly to the right.
That shift to the right means they need a much higher dBHL to achieve that 100% score, but once the sound gets through the middle ear blockage, the inner ear processes it perfectly.
Exactly. The inner ear is functionally intact. Now, let's consider cochlear loss, curve #3, which is sensorineural damage in the inner ear. Here, the function changes profoundly.
How so?
The function is often shallower because the damaged hair cells introduce distortion. It requires a larger volume increase to achieve just a modest increase in recognition. And critically, the PB max is often depressed. It fails to reach 100%, maybe it caps out at 85% or 70%.
So even when the signal is loud enough, the damage prevents perfect processing.
Right, that's the auditory distortion component.
And finally, the clinical red flag. Retrocochlear loss, curve #4, which shows the phenomenon of rollover. This suggests pathology beyond the inner ear, likely involving the auditory nerve or brainstem.
The retrocochlear curve is the definitive sign of a neural pathway issue. This curve reaches a peak, the PB max, which is often lower than 100%, but then it sharply decreases with further increases in presentation level. Making the sound louder actually makes understanding worse.
Why does rollover happen? What is the neurological mechanism for sound becoming unintelligible as it gets louder?
Rollover is believed to happen because the auditory nerve fibers, or the central auditory pathways, are compromised, often due to a tumor like an acoustic neuroma. When the sound is at a moderate, comfortable level, the remaining healthy nerve fibers fire optimally.
Okay.
But as the sound intensity increases further, the system is overwhelmed. The dynamic range of that compromised neural pathway is exceeded. Instead of transmitting a stronger signal, the system just breaks down. The high-level stimulus causes an abnormal increase in nerve fiber firing that results in distortion and a failure to encode the speech signal accurately. The sources define this pathologically. Rollover is clinically defined as a reduction in recognition greater than 20% compared to PB max. This is a critical diagnostic indicator that necessitates immediate medical referral as it points towards serious structural pathology in the auditory pathway.
Okay, so we've established the threshold, the SRT. Now we focus entirely on the quality of hearing above that threshold using suprathreshold word recognition testing. This is typically done, 30 to 40 dBSL above the patient's SRT?
That's right, or sometimes at a fixed loud level, like 70 dBHL. The measurement goal here is twofold. First, to determine the patient's maximum word understanding ability, their PB max for diagnostic purposes, to differentiate the type of loss. And second, to establish a realistic prognostic baseline. Clinically, a patient's performance at this level is the strongest indicator of how well they will perform when using amplification, like hearing aids.
For this level of detailed analysis, we move from the easy-to-identify spondaic words to monosyllabic words. Why are there so many different lists, and why is the concept of phonetic balancing so central?
Well, the complexity of speech required meticulous list development. The original effort was the PB50 list. That's 50 phonetically balanced monosyllabic words developed by Hirsch and others back in 1949. They understood that if your test doesn't accurately sample the sounds of the language, the score is meaningless.
What does true phonetic balancing actually mean, and why is it so hard to achieve?
It means the lists must ensure that the speech sounds, the individual phonemes like S, T, I, E, appear in the test list with the same frequency that they occur in average American English speech.
I see.
So if a list was accidentally heavy on high-frequency sounds like sibilants, sashish, a patient with high-frequency hearing loss would score artificially low. Conversely, if the list was dominated by low-frequency vowels, a score could be artificially high.
The list has to be representative of real language exposure to be valid.
Exactly. The attempt to achieve true phonetic balancing is difficult because language use changes over time, but it remains the guiding principle.
And the most common and current standard list is the NU6 list, developed at Northwestern University.
Yes, the Northwestern University Auditory Test number 6. It consists of 200 monosyllabic words, typically administered in 50-word or even 25-word blocks. This list, validated by Tillman and Carhart, provides the contemporary benchmark for speech recognition testing due to its rigorous phonetic balancing and high familiarity.
But regardless of how perfectly balanced the list is, we run into the massive challenge of statistics when we only test with a sample of words. This brings us to reliability and the concept of critical difference in Table 5.2.
This is where we move from hearing science to statistics. Since we're testing performance using a finite sample of speech, say 25 words, the score achieved has an inherent measurable statistical variability. The score is only an estimate of the patient's true underlying ability.
What is the critical difference? Why must a clinician be so intimately familiar with Table 5.2?
The critical difference is the statistical benchmark. It's the minimum amount of change in score required to be statistically certain at 95% confidence that the observed change represents a true alteration in hearing ability, rather than just random measurement variability between two test sessions.
Wait, if I score 50% on a test and my true score could be drastically higher or lower, that huge uncertainty must cause real friction in counseling patients.
It creates enormous clinical friction, and it's why list length matters so much. If a patient scores 50% on a short 25-word list, Table 5.2 reveals that the true score is statistically likely to be anywhere between 36% and 64%.
Wow, that 28-point range is significant.
It is. So if you see that patient 6 months later, maybe after fitting a hearing aid, and they score 60%, the question is, did the aid help?
You'd think so, a 10% improvement.
But the critical difference for a 25-word list at that score level is approximately 14%. Therefore, the 10% change from 50% to 60% is not statistically significant. You cannot confidently tell the patient the hearing aid improved their underlying ability.
So to claim a true statistically significant improvement, they would need a score of 64% or higher. That difference dictates whether the clinician changes the treatment plan or reassures the patient.
Precisely. And this highlights the clinical trade-off. If we use a larger 50-word list, the uncertainty narrows considerably. For a 50% score, the range narrows from that 36-64% to 42-58%. The required critical difference for a true change drops to around 10% or 12%.
So a larger list gives you more precision.
Yes, using the larger list increases the testing time, but it provides the precision needed for rigorous decision-making, especially when evaluating expensive interventions like hearing aids or cochlear implants.
This moves speech audiometry from a simple percentage score to a true, statistically validated diagnostic tool that forces meticulous clinical practice.
Absolutely. While monosyllabic word tests are crucial for measuring pure discrimination ability, they operate in a kind of clinical vacuum. They ignore the brain's ability to use context.
Why do sentence tests give us a more realistic measure of communication ability, especially when we talk about linguistic context?
Single words remove all external cues. Sentences, however, introduce linguistic context, voice intonation, stress, and, most importantly, redundancy.
Redundancy.
Redundancy means that if the ear misses a single phonar word due to noise or distortion, the brain uses the surrounding words, the semantic context, to fill in the gap. This is how normal hearing works in real life.
The sources mention the early development of sentence tests at Bill Laboratories by Fletcher and Steinberg.
Their work in 1929 was foundational. They understood the need to move beyond isolated speech units. Later refinements, such as the Auditech CID everyday sentences, use conversational vocabulary with 5 keywords per sentence. The test is scored based only on the keywords correctly repeated. The context is there to aid recognition, mimicking natural communication.
Now we enter the area that is most critical to the patient's daily life. Speech recognition and noise, or ISRINE. The sources are clear that this is the primary complaint of nearly all listeners with sensorineural hearing loss.
This is the crux of modern audiology. Performance for listeners with sensorineural loss declines significantly more rapidly than normal listeners as the noise level increases, even if they score 100% in quiet. Research confirms that people with hearing loss need a signal-to-noise ratio, SN ratio, that's 10 to 15 DDZs higher than normal listeners for the same level of performance.
So a normal listener can understand speech when the noise is almost as loud as the voice, but the hearing-impaired listener needs the voice to be substantially louder than the surrounding environment.
Precisely, and we need to distinguish between the two ways noise interferes, because this differentiation guides how we design the noise test and, eventually, how hearing aids process sound.
Tell us about the two types of masking, energetic versus informational.
Energetic masking is physical interference. It occurs when the noise energy itself overwhelms the speech signal energy, like static drowning out a radio host. It interferes at the periphery, at the cochlear. Modern technology, like directional microphones, is very good at mitigating energetic masking.
Okay, so that's the can't hear it problem.
Right. But informational masking is a cognitive problem. It is interference caused by complex or fluctuating background noise, especially multi-talk or babble, a room full of competing voices. The signal is physically audible, but the brain struggles to separate the target speech from other meaningful acoustic streams. This forces the central auditory system to expend massive cognitive effort to process the speech. This type of masking is much harder to mitigate with technology alone.
Speech and noise tests aim to measure the combined impact of these two masking types, revealing the true communication handicap. Let's look at the two tests highlighted in the sources.
The WN, or Words and Noise Test, uses monosyllabic words presented against multi-talk or babble noise. Figure 5.3 is the key analysis of the WIN test. It plots quiet performance against performance in noise.
And figure 5.3 shows that quiet testing alone is extremely poor at predicting how someone will function in real noise. The scatter is just immense.
That is the ultimate takeaway. The shaded area in the figure, which represents a large cohort of patients, over 45% in that study, shows individuals who needed a significantly better SN ratio than was predicted by their quiet score.
Meaning they needed the speaker to be much louder than the noise.
Much louder, yes. A patient might score 100% in a silent booth, yet require a 10 dB SN ratio just to reach 50% understanding in noise.
Yeah.
This discrepancy is the real clinical indicator of communication disability.
That's the justification for SRI testing. If quiet scores can't predict noise performance, the test in quiet is insufficient.
Absolutely. The source emphasizes that for people with hearing loss, a SN ratio decline greater than 2 dBn indicates a significant handicap.
Now, for the other widely used noise test, the QuickSyn, or Quick Speech and Noise Test, the name suggests it's designed for efficiency.
The QuickSyn is the modern clinical workhorse. It uses sentences, and the key innovation is the testing methodology. The SN ratio decreases rapidly throughout the test, while the sentences are presented in steady-state speech babble. It starts easy and gets rapidly harder. This allows for a fast determination of the SN ratio needed to achieve 50% correct sentence recognition, often in just a couple of minutes.
And figure 5.4 effectively validates the speedier QuickSyn by comparing its results against the longer WIN test.
Yes, figure 5.4 shows a strong correlation between the two tests. While one uses words, the WIN, and one uses sentences, the QuickSyn, the results align closely. This confirms that both measure the same underlying ability to overcome noise.
So it validates the QuickSyn as an efficient and reliable clinical tool for routine assessment.
It does, and this body of research provides essential data for amplification choices. The sources note that a 3 dB improvement in SN, which is achievable through modern hearing aid features like noise reduction and directionality, should translate into roughly a 30% improvement in intelligibility. That is a direct, measurable clinical benefit derived from these tests.
We've established the adult protocols. Now we have to address special populations, primarily children, who can't reliably repeat words or sit through complex, timed procedures.
Testing children requires a fundamental shift in methodology, primarily moving from open-set verbal repetition to closed-set visual identification. The tests must use language and vocabulary appropriate for their developmental age, simple words for 3 to 5-year-olds.
So instead of asking them to repeat the word popcorn, they point to a picture of popcorn. Which specific pediatric tests are highlighted?
We have several key standardized tests. First, the WIPI, or Word Intelligibility by Picture Identification. This test uses 25 word lists in a close-set format of 6 pictures. The child identifies the spoken word by pointing to one of the 6 options on the card.
Okay, 6 options.
Second, the NUCHPS, or Northwestern University Children's Perception of Speech. Similar to WIPI, this uses 50 monosyllabic words, but simplifies the visual task slightly by using a closed set of only 4 pictures. Both WIPI and NUCHPS are designed to be acoustically and linguistically suitable for young children, maximizing their chances of success based on comprehension rather than articulation ability.
And what about the test designed for older children that focuses on auditory processing, the LSPA?
The LSPA, or Lexical Neighborhood Test, is used for older children or those where a central auditory processing disorder, or CIPD, is suspected. This test taps into the child's ability to process rapidly changing phonetic information and suppress acoustic distractors.
How does the concept of neighborhood density work, and why is that important for a CIPD diagnosis?
A word has a high neighborhood density if there are many other similar-sounding words in the lexicon. For instance, changing just one phoneme turns cat into cat, cut, cab, or kid. Words with high density are harder to process and differentiate under stress. The LSPA uses words with high or low neighborhood density. A child struggling with high-density words often indicates a central auditory processing issue. The brain is having trouble distinguishing rapidly presented, acoustically similar signals, rather than just a peripheral hearing loss.
To bring this all together and highlight the so what for the listener, these speech recognition measures perform several vital clinical functions beyond just finding a score.
They perform three critical overlapping functions. First, verification of thresholds. The SRT must verify the pure tone thresholds. This is the quality control check for the entire audiometric evaluation.
Right.
Second, assessment of auditory system integrity. Analyzing the psychometric function, especially identifying the presence of rollover, helps localize the pathology. Without speech testing, we might see a slight unilateral high-frequency loss on the PTA, but miss a critical retrocochlear tumor that is only revealed by the failure of word recognition performance to improve at high intensities.
So it's the gatekeeper for medical referral.
Absolutely. And the third function is the most patient-facing: counseling and prognosis.
Aid in counseling and prognosis.
Exactly. The word recognition scores, particularly the PB Max and the SRIN results, predict how well a patient might function with amplification. If a patient only achieves 70% PB Max in quiet, the clinician must set realistic expectations. They can never understand 100% of speech, even with the best technology. These scores provide an objective baseline for comparing performance with and without hearing devices, which is essential for successful fitting and a realistic patient outlook.
So we've come full circle from the 19th century attempts to standardize hearing assessment to these highly digitized, sophisticated tests. What are the lingering challenges that the sources suggest are still being addressed by researchers?
The biggest challenge remains closing the gap between the clinic and reality, what we can call the communication challenge. Even with the Quicksend, we struggle to precisely predict a patient's real-world communication abilities solely from the clinical results.
Why is that gap so hard to close?
Because human communication involves the brain's enormous ability to use context, process distorted speech, utilize redundancy, and handle the significant effort required to listen. We can measure what the patient understands, but we don't effectively measure how hard they had to work to get that 100% score.
I see. The cognitive load?
The cognitive load, exactly. The ongoing focus of research is improving measures of sensitivity and understanding, especially for severe losses and cochlear implant users. The goal is to move beyond simply measuring detection and toward measuring processing efficiency and the cognitive load required to hear and comprehend.
This deep dive has shown us that testing hearing is far more nuanced than just finding the quietest sound a person can hear. It's about assessing their understanding of the world's most crucial signal, speech, and quantifying the pathologies that compromise that understanding.
We've traced the continuous drive for standardization, moving from the historical variability of spoken words to the meticulous phonetic balancing of the NU6 list, and finally to modern digital SN testing. Every single test serves a vital, specific diagnostic purpose.
Before we close, here's a final provocative thought for the listener. Building on the realization that SRIN testing is so vital, we know that auditory perception involves far more than just the ears. It involves the brain's ability to use context and redundancy. So, considering the high prevalence of background noise in modern life, how accurately do we currently measure the cognitive effort required by the brain to process speech, even when the final word recognition score is 100% correct? That effort, that neurological load of listening, may be the next critical frontier in speech audiometry research and the most accurate way to quantify true communication disability.
An excellent point. Understanding the energy expenditure of the listening brain is truly where the future of audiological diagnosis lies.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the stack of sources on speech audiometry. We hope you walk away with a richer, statistically informed understanding of this foundational diagnostic field.